Hi, everybody. It's Miss Rose. Let's go over the week 23 quiz. The first couple problems were Pythagorean theorem problems, and you had to identify which side the hypotenuse was. The first one is rotated in kind of a funny way. You had to look at which side was opposite the 90-degree angle, the longest side, and that's the 45. So when you're plugging those numbers into the Pythagorean theorem, you want to take the other two sides, the legs, and go legs squared plus legs squared equals hypotenuse squared. This was what the first answer blank was asking you for you to substitute the sides into the Pythagorean theorem. Now let's go ahead and actually square those numbers. So 27 squared is 729 plus x squared equals 45 squared, which is 2025. And then we need to solve for x, so we have to go minus 729. Minus 729. 2025 minus 729 is 1296. I recognize that number. I think it's a perfect square. So I think this is going to come out to a nice whole number answer. So remember, last step for Pythagorean theorem is always to square root both sides. We can't forget to do that because if the hypotenuse is 45, the legs have to be smaller than that. There's no way that a leg is going to be 1296. That's way too big. So when you take the square root of 1296, you get 36. Couple little mistakes that I saw for people who had the right idea but just typed the wrong answer into the answer blank. Some of you wrote 36 squared instead of just 36, and that's the whole point I was talking about. The leg has to be smaller than 45. And then I also saw an occasional person, because 36 was a perfect square root again. But once we square rooted the x squared, then now we're solving for x. So you don't want to square root again. We already took the square root. We're done. X is 36. That's the other side length of the triangle. Let's do the same thing in the second triangle. Let's identify which side is the hypotenuse. It's the longest side, the side that's across from the right angle. This time it's the y. So we're going to take the two legs, the 9 and the 40, and substitute those into the Pythagorean theorem. So this is what the first step was asking for. 9 squared plus 40 squared equals x squared. Equals y squared. Now let's do 9 squared. 81. 40 squared, 1600. And then this time, the 81 and the 1600 are together on the left-hand side of the equal sign. So we're just going to combine the like terms and add them up. And then just like the last time, the last step in the Pythagorean theorem is always to take the square root. The square root of 1681 is 41. So just barely, but that is bigger than 40. Remember, the hypotenuse has to be the biggest side. So if you get something less than 40, that wouldn't make sense. All right, the next problem was a simplifying radicals problem. So first, you probably want to make a list of all the perfect squares. Hopefully you already had one in your notes. So I'm going to go through, and one question that's come up is it the same list of numbers every time? Yes. All I'm doing is doing 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared. Remember, squaring is just multiplying a number by itself. So when I want to do 5 squared, I just go 5 times 5, 25. 6 times 6, 36. So I'm just squaring 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared. That's probably big enough. So I want to see what the biggest one of those numbers is that goes evenly into 180. So I just start going through the list. 180 divided by 100 gives me a decimal. 180 divided by 81, decimal. I think I keep getting decimal answers until 36 was the magic number. 180 divided by 36 equals 5. So one of the numbers that we pick when we're looking at the factors of 180, it has to be a number from this list. So there's lots of numbers that go into 180. I don't care about all of those. I want it to be a perfect square. That's the whole point. I want to find the biggest perfect square that I can kind of factor out. So I'm going to rewrite square root of 180 as square root of 36 times square root of 5. When you type that in, that was step 2 in Desmos. So step 1 was just to type in square root of 180. Step 2 was to type in root 36 times root 5, and your decimals should have matched up and been the same. And then the final step is one of these numbers you can square root and you get a whole number answer. So it's the one from our list of perfect squares. So it's going to be the 36. The 36 is perfect, so it gets to go out. So you square root 36 and it's 6. The square root of 5 is messy, so it has to stay in. And that is your final answer. And if you type it in, you'll get the same decimal approximation as you got for the steps before it. All right, the final problem was the most challenging because we had to put everything all together. So one hint that I gave you was you wanted to drop this height as well, because I'm focusing on this rectangle that I made in the middle. So opposite sides in a rectangle are congruent, so I can go 14 and 14. And then what I want to know is how much do I have left over on the sides. So what I want to do is I know it's 30 total for that whole segment. So I can just go 30 minus 14 to see what's left over, and it was 16. I think the biggest mistake was making this 16, but the hypotenuse is 12, and the hypotenuse is the longest side in a triangle. So people were asking me questions like, why am I getting a negative number when I'm doing the Pythagorean theorem? There were 2 little pieces left over, so you had to take your 16 and divide it into 2 pieces. 8 and 8. So now 2 things work out. First off, all 3 of those lengths do add up to 30, 8, 14, and 8. And I have a leg that's shorter than the hypotenuse, so that's a good sign too. So next I plug my sides into the Pythagorean theorem. So I'm looking at this triangle. Hypotenuse is 12, legs are x and 8. X squared plus 8 squared equals 12 squared. 8 squared is 64. 12 squared is 144. And then I have to subtract so that I can solve for x. So x squared equals 80. So square root of 80. So some people weren't exactly sure what they were supposed to be typing in to the answer blank. So if you just typed in square root of 80 and got the decimal, that's about 8.9. That makes sense. Square root of 81 is 9. So it makes sense that square root of 80 is about 8.94. So that's the decimal approximation, about 8.94. But when I said I wanted the exact answer in simplified radical form, that meant that I wanted you to use those perfect squares from up above again, this orange list of numbers here. So I'm going to go 80 divided by, I don't even need to try these bottom couple because they're too big. 80 divided by 64, 49, 36. The one that goes in evenly was 16. Let me double check that just to be sure. 80 divided by 16 is 5. So I'm going to break this into root 16 times root 5. 16 is the perfect one, so it gets to go out. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 5 is messy, so it has to stay in. If you type 4 root 5 into the calculator, you should also get about 8.94. If I didn't, then I would have known that I did something wrong. So that is a run through of your quiz questions. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Bye.